Well, I see in a lot of the major card games that the competitive formats have been suffering from issues such as staleness, overpricing, and toxic mechanics. Well, I'm going to propose a solution to these problems with the solid competitive card game of Red Dragon Inn. Before we go further, I want to ask what makes a card game competitive? After asking around some of the most competitive players I can find, I found that there are two common requirements a game has to be competitive. A, the game's mechanics reward skill, and B, there is diversity within the meta. Red Dragon Inn, I believe, meets both of these requirements in spades and does so at a reasonable cost. Chapter 2, Game Explanation. Red Dragon Inn by Slugfest Games is a 2 to 6 plus player card game based around surviving the average adventurer's tavern experience. Players have to manage 3 resources: fortitude, alcohol, and gold. If the fortitude and alcohol content stats match or cross, you lose. If you run out of gold, you lose. If you're the last one around, you win. Players take turns playing actions and taking drinks. Players can use their actions to make other players lose their resources or to start a round of gambling. This sounds solid so far, but what makes this system interesting? Well, this game is character-based. Instead of a TCG-style player-built deck, players choose from one of over 50 character decks. The decks control what options a player has and that player's overall playstyle. Part 3, Competitive Viability. So that's a brief overview about how the game works, but what makes it fit to our requirements? First is the frequent player interaction in the game that rewards skill. Almost every character is heavy on response cards. The typical deck is around 10 to 30% response cards. Second, the character decks are very consistent and facilitate drawing around 5 cards a turn. This is because the hand size rules in this game that at the start of the turn, players can discard any number of cards but will always drop to their hand size of 7. This has some really cool implications that will be discussed later. Part 4, Formats. There are a few different formats for Red Dragon Inn. The best casual format is the 4-player free-for-all with base Red Dragon Inn rules. However, this format leads to the typical free-for-all problems like those seen in Commander or CDH. The real best competitive format is Draft 2v2. In this format, each team gets 1 ban then 1 pick, followed by 1 more ban and 1 pick. The first team to pick gets to choose the drink deck. This format lets characters combo together to really highlight the unique strategies in this game. It also dramatically increases the number of viable characters on the tier list. There's also a side format called Boss Battles that use the additional set of boss cards included with some characters. It's an okay and surprisingly balanced format, but the character pool is much more limited. There are currently 9 drink decks in the game. 1 for each base set, and 1 for the Evil Pookie expansion. Drinks set the tempo of the game. Everyone is on a clock, and the average alcohol content of these drinks determines the time. Typically, I'd recommend limiting the used drink decks for competitive to the first 4 drink decks, but the other ones do work fine as well. This is mainly because the later the set the drink decks release, the more powerful and crazy the drinks become. This means that characters with more ways to interact with drinks get stronger when paired with later drink decks. You're gonna struggle to last like 2 rounds with Zarkan on the Evil Pookie drink deck. In competitive draft, the option of choosing the drink deck goes to the first player. They get to set the tempo of the game, but they're also open to getting counterpicked. Part 6, Draw Mechanics and Deck Cycling. Deck cycling is one of the key mechanics to the game of Red Dragon Inn. Knowing what cards are remaining in your deck is key to setting up your future strategy. This fact also lets you narrow down your opponent's options as well. By using your opponent's discard to your advantage, you can do things like figure out the likelihood of negates or potential gambling cards. Everyone's deck is preset and is therefore public knowledge. This rewards a player's skill in handling the game state. Let me break down an example for you. Our Sarah player here wants to kill a Deirdre player who's at 19 fortitude, 18 alcohol, and 1 gold with 5 cards in hand and 7 in deck. The cards in Sarah's hand are You Can't Block What You Can't See, 2 A True Rogue Gets the Job Done Undetected, Does This Taste Like Poison to You, Winning Hand, and 2 Gambling, I'm In. While a kill is pretty likely here, Sarah has to make the call between trying to gamble out the Deirdre, hitting for some unblockable fortitude damage, or some mixed damage. Looking through Deirdre's discard, we can see the following cards. The first thing we can notice is the lack of gambling cards in discard, meaning it's highly likely Deirdre could challenge us on gambling. So, does this mean that the unnegatable damage is the way to go, right? Well, let's be sure about that. Healing damage back isn't negating, and Deirdre has access to 2 cards that can be played in response to our card. But Deirdre also has 3 regular negates. We can check the discard to see if there's any that have already been played. Looking at her graveyard, there's 1 of each engraved. This means that we can conclude that she is more likely to die to the unnegatable attack. It's an 85% chance of kill versus a 75% chance of kill. Optimization like this rewards a player for showing skill and thinking through their actions. Long-term planning is rewarded. Part 7, Gambling. I haven't gotten into it yet, so let me break down how gambling works in Red Dragon Inn. I refer to this system as hot seat gambling. On start of round, everyone antes 1 gold. The rules are that the person who starts the round is in control of the round. Priority is then passed to each player, giving them a chance to respond with their own gambling card to take control of the round. If priority managed to pass back to the player who is in control, that player wins the round. There are also winning hands that require cheating to take control after they're played. Some characters have cards that can punish cheating cards, and some characters can kick out other players of gambling, and there are some cards that can stop players from anteing at all. What does this mean for competitive? It means that players can force the last player not in control to play a gambling card from their hand, thus the hot seat. However, it also means that two players can pass gambling control back and forth to raise ante or to trigger character-specific effects for gambling cards. However, this leaves them open to a well-timed gambling card from their opponent or a kick-out card. This makes the gambling system in this game very high risk, but very high reward. Part 8. Tier list and character competitive viability. Now that I feel like we've established our first competitive requirement, let's move on to the second point of character viability. First off, we have a tier list for the 4-player free-for-all format. Characters in A tier and higher have a very solid chance of winning, but thanks to the free-for-all nature of this game, almost all characters have a decent chance of winning. This is a fine variety for a meta, but it's not truly exceptional. This is where the 2-player format comes into play. Look at that difference in how many characters can be used. This is because characters, when combined, can escalate each other's strengths and patch up weaknesses. To really understand how these combos work, we need to break down characters into their main gameplay types. We have six main types of characters: setup and combo, defensive and passive, value, gambling, aggro, and mixed. Setup characters are all about using a turn or two to set up some conditions, then blowing away your opponent with overwhelming effects. Think Wrench, who slowly builds machines each turn, or Piper, who's all about setting up massive arrow chains to beam your opponent. Passive characters are all about saving themselves and not dying, such as Brother Bastion with the defensive prayers, or Halden, who just has a lot of negates. Value characters all operate around getting extra stuff from every card played. The key characters here are Natili, who gets curses for each card played, and Warthorn, whose cards get an extra story effect when played. Gambling characters focus around the money mechanic. This is Gurky's domain. Aggro characters go faced, such as Cormac or Gog, and mixed characters fall strongly into multiple categories or don't fall into any of one. Lich King does a bit of everything, as does Erin with her shape-shifting mechanic. Part 10. Combos. Now that we have an understanding of the basic character types, this game's competitive nature rewards synergy and clever thinking, so creating a team is well important. Examples of team archetypes to be used in draft. Gambling. The goal of this team comp is to bankrupt your opponents by having more gambling-oriented cards than them. This is a strong team comp due to the ease of passing priority back and forth between two teammates. You haven't lived until you can threaten a kill with Tip the Winch. A lot of characters in the comp also double as non-gambling characters, giving this team comp flexibility other teams might not have. Characters like Torgelstorf and Frank have multiple win cons. This team loses to getting rushed down, getting mind gamed, and getting counterpicked. If you're overconfident and misread your opponent, a single winning hand could cause your plan to backfire. Aggro. The goal of this is to just kill your opponent by beating them to death. Just picking characters that go face is often more effective than it should be. This classic team comp loses to defensive team comps. Defensive. This team comp is all about outlasting your opponent. Eventually, the drink deck or your redirection will kill them. This team comp is often dependent on counterpicks and specific targeting. Using Natili against characters like Halden and using the Lich King against characters like Cormac. This team comp can lose to a lot of matchups, but mostly, this team's matchup are determined by the skill of each team. AoE combo. This team comp is all about abusing some characters that can retaliate or redirect damage to one player off of the enemy team. Wrist Snarl can use Fury to immediately charge Pookie, and Remy can redirect AoE damage he's taken from another player. So if you hit a character that hits all three other players, your teammate can swing that direction at another player, thus greatly increasing the amount of damage you can do a turn. This team comp has some consistency issues and is a big risk, because oftentimes you do still have to go lower on one teammate's health. It's very fun to play and extremely strong when it goes off. Counterpick plus value. Just play anti-characters for whatever your opponent drafts into. A lack of coherent strategy doesn't matter if your opponent is struggling to do theirs. Use a strong value engine to carry this. This team's comp success depends on how effective the counterpick is at punishing or slowing down the opposing team. Picking a character like Nitral into a gambling comp can be effective at punishing the opponent for trying to gamble you. Strategies like this let you coast through a game with an uncontested Torgelsnorf or Osric. 11. Conclusion. While these matchups don't create a true rock, paper, scissors format, there's definitely a shimmer of that classic aggro versus control versus mid-range. When adding all this together, Red Dragon Inn becomes a playground for people who like competitive card games. It has become mine and many playgroups' favorite game for similar reasons. This game has a lot of potential to be competitive, and I have to highly recommend it. Also, a bit of a side note, every possible ruling and interaction is specified in the back of the rulebook. Like, it's an impressive amount of rulebooks. Just find the rulebook of the newer character, and they'll tell you in detail how to handle a situation. Recommended sets for the game. I recommend set 6, set 7, set 8, Brother Bastion, Pookie, Piper vs. Ripsnarl, and Osric for new players. Not necessarily in that order, but these are my favorites and contain just about everything you need for a competitive experience. Secondary sets would be 1, set 4, set 5, Wrench, Nitral vs. Keat, Natili, Witch King vs. Adonis, and Aaron the Ever-Changing. These really flesh out the character roster. Truth be told, you don't need every set, the options just increase when you do. Similar games. Villainous is like, okay, if Red Dragon Inn is Magic the Gathering, Villainous is Pokemon. It's very fun, and it has that similar character-based playstyle, but there is limited player interaction, and the balancing is very bad. Don't at me. Thanks for watching this very untraditional card game video. I really do hope y'all like it and consider giving the game a shot. More Vanguard and Yu-Gi-Oh content coming up, but if this video does well, I have a plan for more different content like this. Alright, so I have a copy of Gloomhaven, just sitting in my room because I can't ever get my friends to meet up with me to play it. If this video gets like 150 likes, I'll do a full playthrough by myself, recording the experience and make a full review. That's if I don't go insane first or die of cringe. Either that or I make a video where I mathematically solve the card game classic Dominion. See you next time.